All right, so I'm going to start talking about, we're talking about stadiums, we're talking about baseball, we're talking about Mexicans. I'm only going to talk about Chavez Ravine now. I hope you're okay with that.
Yeah, Are there Mexicans in it?
Plenty. Is there chorizo in it?
Is there any chorizo left over for me?
To give some context before we move further, let's just place listeners in the area of Chavez Ravine, okay, in Los Angeles, 1958. Okay, so you know where Dodger Stadium is?
Mm-hmm.
There.
I don't follow.
In particular, there was a spot known as Stone Quarry Hills, which that's exactly where Dodger Stadium is placed, although I've never once in my entire life heard that phrase before, Stone Quarry Hills. Yeah, that was Chavez Ravine, but also the area surrounding Dodger Stadium where like Cathedral High School is off of Bishop Road, as well as Academy Road that leads you past the Police Academy, and then you go to Radio Hill where that guy was chasing that guy with the rock, and then you go out of the bottom of the hill and there's Solano Canyon, which is at the bottom, and it was cut off by the 110 freeway, or else all that whole area would be connected still. If you look at pictures of Chavez Ravine, like that area right there, that looks like it's still preserved pretty well because it's hilly. They're really steep hills, and then there's houses built up leading up, and then everything's cut off by Dodger Stadium,
which is where Mike Piazza lives. I don't know.
Hey, good job, you remembered one.
Thank you. I only remember him because he was on the Mets.
His name sounds like pizza.
Yeah,
he's also a really good player too.
Whatever. How is his sauce? And I don't mean how fast he pitches.
300 acres bordered by areas we now know as Echo Park, Chinatown, Lincoln Heights, and Angelino Heights.
Okay.
Like 3 miles away from downtown LA, basically.
Yeah. 3 miles? It's that far?
Yeah. You have to go through Chinatown to get there.
Oh, no.
Forget it.
Forget that. I'm not going through there through traffic.
The area that would become Dodger Stadium was just dirt and hills when Julian Chavez came to town in the 1830s. Chavez was a Mexican pioneer who would go on to serve with the first County Board of Supervisors and would serve 3 terms. Good for him. He was born in 1810 in New Mexico and arrived in Los Angeles before it was his state, when California was part of Mexico and was transitioning from being dominated by Spanish-owned missions and then divided into ranchos. Consult whatever episode that was that we did that.
All of them.
Every single one.
Just listen to all of them and let us know which episode it is.
Sleepy Pebbletown. Sleepy Pebbletown. It's not confirmed, but many people believe that he came west with one of the many trapping parties, which were groups of men who would hunt small animals for fur trade. Nice coat, by the way.
They're small animals. I need a lot of them, okay? And I couldn't get the eyeballs out. That's why they're all looking at you.
The census of the city in 1836 listed Chavez's occupation as a laborer. He was 27. Around this time, he becomes interested in investing in real estate. And in those days, if you wanted to get yourself some land, all you had to do was petition the city council, which was then known as the Ayuntamiento.
Yeah, you're like missing 4 letters, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's my one Spanish lesson for everybody listening. Ayuntamiento. All you had to do basically was petition for land. Like, all right.
What's your skin color? All right.
In 1844, Chavez acquired 83 acres of land near downtown, which was soon to be called Chavez Canyon. And as soon as he began to establish himself, he became more involved in politics. In 1838, he served as the assistant mayor, which was his first political job. After he served his position, he nabbed up a couple more as councilman in 1846 and judge of the waters during the last years of Mexican rule over our region. I couldn't really figure out what judge of the waters meant, but I found out that judge of the plains, which was also a role someone could have, and Chavez would have eventually. The duties of that were to settle cattle disputes and to see that justice was served between owners of livestock. So I guess judge of the waters is like Aquaman.
Between fishes.
Yeah. You cut that out, catfish. No, gee.
But the baleen whale keeps encroaching on my...
Yeah, fish. Coast meats.
Fish talk.
Fish talk. Listen to our other podcast, Fish Talk.
Fish talk.
What was the other one we came up with?
I don't know.
Talking football, something
about Air Bud.
In 1852, after California, and in particular Los Angeles, was now part of the United States and not under Mexican rule, Chavez was elected as a member of the first LA County Board of Supervisors around this time, 1852. So Chavez petitioned for this land and received it, but after that, he didn't really do much with it. It was just sort of sat here. Long before people started to build homes here, the area served a lot of different purposes. The Keach tribe stayed in this area for some time.
Squatters.
That's a dirty word in this tale. It served as a cattle ranch in some point, as well as a dairy farm. There were a couple of cemeteries.
Native American cemeteries?
One was Jewish and the other was Chinese.
So they are Native Americans. Jewish and Chinese, how'd they get mixed together?
No, they were separate. Please, segregation was like complete.
Even among dead people.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just there. They're just pieces of dead meat now. It's not like their souls are going to intermingle. Yeah, just plots of dirt with worms.
It's a corpse farm.
That's all it is. Where do you think the meats got their meat from?
I read at some point that because of this, there was a time when this area was referred to as Cemetery Ravine. And I wish I'd stayed that way. Yeah. I also read...
And it would be called Cemetery Stadium.
Oh, that Los Angeles Skeletons, because there's no afterlife.
Los Angeles Skeletons.
No, afterlife.
Or the Los Angeles meats.
I also read at some point that when the cemeteries were ready to move on to different areas, they both collected the remains out of the ground and then moved to areas like Whittier. But I also read the cemeteries themselves were eventually buried along with all the other parts of Chavez Ravine. So there might be a cemetery, ironically, buried underneath everything. That's not confirmed.
We're going to have to go digging.
Got your shovel?
I got my play shovel from the beach. I'm all ready to go dig up corpses. Yet again, I feel like this is probably the third time we've had to dig up a corpse in this. All right, pause it. We'll be back.
Oh my God, that was a lot. That was a lot.
His
skeletons.
Bones really crumbled quickly.
I did not expect that.
Turns out there is an afterlife. They yelled. They screamed.
We should stop putting people in the dirt.
Praise Jesus.
He was the center fielder for the Coast Meats. So Chavez Canyon was at some point also served as a county pest farm, which is where they sent all the Chinese and Mexican residents who were suffering from scourge after the smallpox outbreak of 1850 and 1880.
So the
pests,
the people
I'm pretty sure,
people were pests. That's what I mean.
Yeah, they could have called it a pox farm. They didn't. No. It was also referred to as isolation camp, or as I like to think of it, quarantine falls. But there weren't any falls. Maybe like temperature or heart rate. I don't know how smallpox works. Victims of smallpox were usually transported to Chavez Canyon by a small black wagon known as Black Maria. And it was a real bummer to watch it coming, because it was either like it either had somebody that you knew or it was coming for you, because it was a small community.
Black Maria's coming for you.
There was a real bad outbreak of smallpox in the 1860s and actually affected many Native Americans in the area who would go pick grapes by the river. Of course, got hit hard by smallpox across the country.
That's weird that like that was the disease.
Yeah, that was it, and it didn't like affect. Chinese and Mexicans.
Affected us.
Yeah, but
it really affected them.
They had never seen it before.
Smallpox for us, big pox for them. That's not nice.
The pox on the
big or small.
Although it took like we just said, a big toll on Chinese and Mexicans. The Kich took the biggest hit from the smallpox, wiping out half their population.
Oh my God! I know, and that's already a population that's been severely
dwindled
depleted.
Down. Yeah, it hit a peak in 1863 when 14 people across the city died in one day, which my calculations may be wrong, was half the population of the city. Kind of scary, but we already talked about the plague and how bad that was. So.
Yeah, and nowadays, like 14 people died when we started this podcast because they heard we were starting a podcast.
Smallpox podcast. Think about it.
Smallpox hosted by Airbud.
Most pause.
The Small Pause Cast.
So 3 years into the new century, in 1903, a tuberculosis hospital was established in Chavez Ravine, which still stands to this day, or at least the day this was recorded, the Barlow Respiratory Hospital.
Oh no, I hate that place.
Do you really?
It scares me.
It's very scary.
Yeah, I don't like it.
It's incredibly spooky.
Yeah,
it's
whenever I have to go to your house and we somehow end up near there,
because I make you go there.
It's good for you, you say.
I'll get back to talking about it, but the personal stories. Right there, they have the main lot of the hospitals, which is great, and it has a beautiful look to it. And then across the street are just abandoned sleeping, like houses that just say like sleeping training centers or something along those lines. They just look like houses where people are murdered for fun. Yeah. Take him to the old sleeping place and cut his head off. Barlow Respiratory Hospital was set up in 1901 by Dr. Walter Jarvis Barlow, which sounds like a serial killer name. Himself a sufferer of tuberculosis, and he set it up to help Angelenos with TB to get care that it needed. Now, according to their original mission statement, they were established to help those who couldn't afford private care and who weren't being served by another county hospital. So that kind of like good intentions.
But still, it scares me, so shut it down.
Shut it down. What are those trees thinking? Shut it down. He purchased the 25 acres of the hospital with his own money and money donated from his mother-in-law, Mrs. Alfred Solano, who I believe Solano Canyon is named after, which is a street that runs through Chavez Ravine. Another donator was J.B. Lankershim, I'm pretty sure, of Lankershim Boulevard. The reason that this area was sought for TB and eventually became a respiratory hospital was because of the air quality and the natural surroundings of Chavez Ravine and Elysian Park as a whole, which could be attributed to the recovery. Think like Abbott Kinney, like coming over here. Fresh air saved his life. If you haven't driven past Barlow Hospital, I suggest you should. It's around Scott.
Greg, I told you already. I have. It's scary.
I'm talking to everybody else, okay? And you better and listen. You better nut up because we're going tonight. I don't know if there's dead bodies there. We're gonna find some.
We're gonna make some if there aren't.
Leave the shovel. Bring the axe.
My beach axe.
It's for storming the sandcastles. Bring me the finest wench.
Sea wench.
Coast meat. Yeah, it's really neat looking. It's spooky. It's right off of Scott Road on Stadium Way, which is on the way to Dodger Stadium. There's been this whole push-pull thing for a while over the last few years. The Alley Conservatory is trying to save it, and other people are trying to close it down and trying to take the land, and it's probably going to become like a parking lot for a souvenir stand or something.
It's a parking lot for the Dodger parking lot.
See it if you can, because it might not be there for very long.
Yeah, don't see it. It's scary.
During this whole century or however long it's been, Chavez Ravine served purposes, but it was still, like, for the most part, a massive of just empty land that was close to downtown. It wasn't desirable to set up commerce in because it had steep hills. You don't want to have like a Chinese laundromat halfway up a steep hill, you know? One book I was reading referred to the hills as hopelessly steep, which I agree. So the land was still being unused, so no one was quite going to stop any impoverished residents from trying to set up shacks around there, and that's what happened. Low to no income Mexicans began moving into these unused areas and building like these ramshackle homes. So there's 3 neighborhoods in Chavez Ravine. There's Bishop, La Loma, and Palo Verde.
PV.
Yeah, you from PV? They raised sheep and goats and pigs. There were peacocks here and there, and no ostriches though, because ostrich is like a rich man's game.
Yeah, those are purely recreational.
Yeah. Everything else served a purpose. They grew corn and sugar canes. According to several sources, Chavez Ravine, which is now being called...
Did they grow bubblegum?
Yeah, they did a bubblegum farm.
If Wrigley catches wind of this...
He will...
Or rather, if one of his catchers catch wind of it.
Very good catchers on the team. See what it is? See what it did? See what it did there?
Look at me.
Chavez Ravine, which was now being called that, was closer to a rural Mexican village than like a neighborhood that was 3 miles away from City Hall.
Why was it changed from canyon to ravine?
They probably just started respecting the ravine that was there.
I prefer canyon.
You just like alliteration, I think.
Yeah. How about Ramirez Ravine? Why don't we change it to that?
Anyone named Ramirez around here?
No.
Just the Night Stalker. It was the Mexican equivalent to what the Japanese had on Terminal Island. It was like this small bubble that existed for a while where this close-knit ethnic community created an environment that resembled their homeland. It was really special. Now, although the residents of Chavez Ravine...
Similar ending to Terminal Island as
well.
Very
similar. Very similar.
Spoiler alert.
I don't mean to ruin this for everybody, but Dodger Stadium went up in Terminal Island.
Don't ruin it. Did Dodger Stadium get built? I don't want to know.
Although the residents of Chavez Ravine kind of lived in squalor, they had this sense of togetherness that made the experience splendid. Like the living situation made them all closer. It was idyllic. Now I listened to interviews and I've read all these like first-hand accounts of growing up there and them playing in the Elysian Park and running to the river and gooping around. It sounds a little, quaint. It sounds quaint. Mayberry, but really poor. There's 300.
How much money they made?
There's 300 families living throughout the neighborhood in these years of Chavez Ravine as it was flourishing. So you had this like first generation coming either directly from Mexico or being here since it was Mexico, and then they were having children, and then people were being born. These Mexican Americans were being born right at Chavez Ravine. So like life was growing, even though
life finds a way.
Life finds a way. Dun, no, I was about to sing Back to the Future.
Dun, 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 dun. Marty found a way.
He impregnated his own mother. He found a way. All right, so everything's going good for everyone in Chavez Ravine. Everyone's having a great time, living like paupers. Exactly. So then things start happening. In 1946, the City of LA's Planning Commission was beginning to look at ways to improve impoverished areas, and they were conducting house-to-house visits. Chavez Ravine not only suffered from having a lot of poor people, it also had a bunch of people who had TB, which does not look good on paper. So the roster wasn't great. 11 areas were listed on this survey as blighted areas, and of course Chavez Ravine was on the list, cited for improper use of land, poor street patterns, a high proportion of substandard housing, poor sanitation, juvenile delinquency, and the presence of tuberculosis. I hope so. There's a hospital there. Around this time, one of the heroes of the story comes along. That's when we meet Frank Wilkinson, who was the assistant director of the Los Angeles City Housing Authority and a long defender of Chavez Ravine. He grew up in Beverly Hills, and he went to UCLA, where he joined the Republican Party, which is not what it is today. And he was active in...
It's better.
More guns.
Wider. Fewer women.
We're wider than we've ever been. He was also very active in the Youth for Hoover, which was Herbert Hoover, not the street.
Is it Youth for or Hoover?
Hoover.
Okay.
Yeah, you like it?
No.
After college, Wilkinson went on a trip around the world and returned with a different perspective on the livelihood after his exposure to extreme poverty. Poor guy. Wilkinson came from a generation of activists who had seen the Depression of the 30s, where like public housing was part of a broad movement for social reform. He joined the Housing Authority in 1942 in its like early days, when his purpose was to end slum housing in the city. From way before even knowing what Chavez Ravine was, had this like system built in where he wanted to take these bad homes and make them into like public areas where many people could fit in and live well.
Like a project.
Yeah, like a project, yeah. Hey, listen, it's better than like a shack made of like plywood. You know what? That's not true. I don't know. I've never lived in a project.
Well, speaking from someone who's lived in both, who was born in one and raised in the other, they're both great. I love them.
Can we just spend the rest of this time describing your time in the projects and in a shack home? Under the then mayor Fletcher Bowron, another reform-minded liberal Republican who was elected in 1938, the LA Housing Authority supported the idea of building decent homes for the poor and low-income families. He also believed in racial integration in the city's developments. Couple of good guys, Bowron and Wilkinson, side by side. So they both have Chavez Ravine in their sights, but the reason why they went for this area, other than the 10 blighted areas, was because out of all these 300 acres, very little of it was actually occupied. So they had thought that they could temporarily displace a smaller population than if they went for another area, in the hopes that they would eventually get them all situated back in, restored in better homes. So that's really what's going on with their plans. Then, in 1949, another thing happens. President Harry Truman introduced the Fair Deal, which had very good intentions, such as getting all Americans health care. When my
Never.
Never. It's never going to happen.
No. Not if my new Republicans will have something to say about it.
I mean, if I keep shooting people and there's free health care, then they're going to keep getting fixed. I don't get how it's going to help me. And my problem of I have too many bullets. Fair deal also help people get minimum wage raised, as well as extending the Social Security coverage. Do you get Social Security? I'm asking you.
Yeah, I've been getting it for a few years now. Is it too soon?
Yeah, it might be too soon. I mean, don't stop getting payments.
No, I'm not going to say anything. They think I'm dead. Little do they know. This is not all there is. I'm still around.
Past 20, there is a life. So included in this
I'm mostly retired.
You dress like a very retired person, by the way. Just no pal. Ketchup on my shirt. Included in this Fair Deal Act was the Federal Housing Act of 1949, an initiative for public housing for low-income families. The idea was to take these like ramshackle housings of areas like in Chavez Ravine, tear them down, place them with modern public housing for thousands of low-income families, and that was kind of the push for that. The mayor, Bowron, voted and approved a housing project containing 10,000 new units, and it was to be called Elysian Park Heights. Good intentions, right? Everyone has good intentions. We're all going to save the world.
But you know what they say about the best intentions?
No, what do they say about it?
They all lived happily ever after. I was trying to figure the Willy Wonka line. That's it, right? You know what happened to the boy that got every dream come true? And
then he looks so sad. What do they say?
What are you going to yell at me again? Oh, dear boy. I'm going to shoot you in an elevator into the sky. That's all.
He like gives him the factory, and then he's like, let's get on this elevator. I don't know if we're going to live past getting through the ceiling. It might cut us to ribbons. Let's find out. You're crazy.
Together.
This is an emotional roller coaster as well as a real roller coaster. How did they get down?
Actually, if you read the books, they go to the moon after they go into space. I think those Oompa Loompas up there.
He's got to place them everywhere. He needs work done. Good intentions. Everyone's going to save the world. Well, even their execution on paper sounds bad. With the best intentions, of course, city officials would use eminent domain to clear the residents out, pave new roads, then apply for federal funds to build public housings. If you don't know what eminent domain is, it's when the government seizes private property to repurpose it for public use. Only after, of course, the private owners accept payment, just compensation. And there isn't any options as far as turning the government down. You can be like, nah, it's cool. Now, sometimes it could be used for good. For example, like if the state needs to build a dam or a lake to provide water
or a high-speed rail
they use eminent domain to like buy someone out of the land so they could use it for that. Most of the time though, eminent domain is pretty shady. I think I was looking for like a really good example of eminent domain abuse when I realized that I was doing research on one.
If only there was something,
but basically the idea of public use is vague, and you could buy out a bunch of homes and build a high-rise condo in a shopping plaza and raise the property value of an area.
Shopping plaza.
We don't have enough Trader Joe's in my area.
I've said it all along.
You know what your problem is here? Not enough Trader Joe's.
Where am I going to shop at? Sprouts?
I'm done with Whole Foods. I'm just not going back in there. There's too many actors.
And Gelson's is so pedestrian.
I don't want my soup coughed on by someone who makes $80,000 a year. That's disgusting.
I want my soup coughed on by at least 6 figures.
So in July of 1950, the city moved forward with the plans to repurpose Chavez Ravine. All residents of Chavez Ravine received letters from the city telling them that they would have to sell their homes in order to make the land available for the proposed Elysian Park Heights. Frank Wilkinson knew how this all sounded, and he understood that the people of Chavez Ravine loved their neighborhood, so he promised them that they would have the first option to move back when construction was completed. Very sweet guy. Elysian Park Heights would include 24 13-story buildings and more than 162-story bunkers, along with newly rebuilt playgrounds and schools. Some residents of Chavez Ravine resisted their orders to move, and because of that, they were referred to as squatters. Bad word here, okay, friend?
Hey.
You want to throw that word around?
Squat, squat, squat.
You are a cop from the 50s.
You there, what are you squatting on?
Squatters on the land they've been living on for decades, so...
Should have called it the LA Squatters.
Many others in the area didn't think they had a choice in the matter, and they relocated. Most received insubstantial or no compensation for their homes and property. Many claimed that they were ripped off, and because it was a poor community, when the city came offering them a small amount, they took it. Either the price was being too much to turn down, or the fear of being evicted with nothing. Some people claim that they have gotten only a couple thousand to move on, and when they went to find new homes in other areas, they discovered that it was nowhere near enough. They were pushed out of their neighborhood where they were comfortable, and on top of losing their sense of community, so they were completely pushed away. Some people, however, stayed refused to leave, and then because, as I'll say right now, there was such a big delay in anything actually happening that they actually got away with it for a decade.
Is that where all those pictures come from?
We'll talk about that. That was actually on a day. It was a 2-hour span all those pictures came in. So by the end of summer of 1952, Chavez Ravine was, for the most part, a ghost town. At this time, many homes were bulldozed and...
Ghosts. They do exist.
There is an afterlife. After a long enough delay, some houses were actually sold. They were auctioned off. Some were set on fire by the local fire department so they could practice putting it out.
Getting in bed with the enemy, the fire department is.
So Frank Wilkinson saw all this happening, and he fought to continue repurposing this land and getting the neighborhood residents back in their homes. Then, good old Joe McCarthy steps in, but steps in nowhere near Los Angeles. Something almost completely unrelated happens, and it's very popular. Now this is where everything goes from awful to double awful, and Chavez Ravine gets tangled up in the Red Scare era. So there are many supporters of federal public housing and many supporters of Chavez Ravine being one of the places that received it because there were so many impoverished Angelenos, but the plan had opponents. The loudest of these voices of opposition were anti-communist supporters who saw public housing projects as a socialist plot against the country and everything we stood for. How dare you protect poor people. Now, McCarthy's main focus of attack on Los Angeles was the film industry, which led to the Hollywood blacklist. Consult a future episode. But that doesn't mean that his cronies didn't sniff out an opportunity to make a fuss. A public interest group known as CASH, Citizens Against Social Housing, it rules everything around me. Dollar bills. Cash went after the Chavez Ravine project and began screaming, socialism, socialism. What do we got, socialism? When do we want it? Never. So with that group coming after the project, the city councils caved in like almost not like nothing. On top of that, in 1952, Frank Wilkinson, who now had become something of a renowned activist, faced questioning by the House Un-American Activities Committee.
HUAC.
He refused to answer to the HUAC whether he was a communist or not. So of course, he was fired from his job from the Housing Authority and as assistant to the mayor and sentenced to 9 months in jail. He was one of the last two people jailed for refusing to answer if he was a communist, which is bold, but being part of the last two still means that you go to prison. Also, funny enough, he was a communist. He was enrolled in the Communist Party.
So he deserved it.
Good for him. I also read somewhere that Mayor Bowron punched a man in the audience of a crowd who called him a servant of Stalin. The mayor. So obviously, anti-communists meant business. So the Los Angeles City Council attempted to bail on the public housing contract, which they had with the federal authorities, but it was too late. The courts ruled the contract legally binding. Then, a man running
Sounds like communist law.
Who are we, servants of Stalin?
That's our other podcast.
It's very political.
But it's servant, like, you know, a dog is man's servant. So it's Air Bud. It's an Air Bud affiliate.
We stay in our Air Bud theme, in our Air Bud universe.
Yeah, the Budiverse.
So then, a man running for mayor named Norris Paulson used the controversy of Chavez Ravine as part of his political platform. He promised to stop the housing project and other examples of un-American spending, and with that, we had ourselves a newly elected Mayor Paulson, poor people hater. He was elected mayor in 1953, and the public housing project's days were numbered. Now, after much negotiation, Mayor Paulson bought land taken from the Chavez Ravine back from federal government at a drastically reduced price, with a stipulation that the land be used for a public purpose. Sure, except privately owned public purpose. And at some point, the land was offered to Walt Disney as a site for the original Disneyland, but he turned it down.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Funny. During all these delays when nothing was actually going on, many people began returning to their houses, the ones that weren't bulldozed or they weren't set on fire, while some families, like I said, had never left. They refer to themselves as Los Desterrados, the uprooted, I probably said it wrong, living on this land that they grew up on, which was now being taken away from them, right from under them. So around this time now,
the ground is.
Let's cut to New York City. So by the 50s, New York City. Yeah, play the Mary Tyler Moore theme song.
Oh wait, that's Laverne and Shirley.
Yeah, that's Laverne and Shirley,
Sorry, that's
which
Milwaukee.
we know all too well.
I didn't go far east enough.
So by the 50s, New York had three teams. It had the Giants, who around the same time moved to San Francisco. It had the Yankees, and it had the
with their smile. Laverne and Shirley.
I think you're singing the MASH theme song with Laverne and Shirley lyrics. They also had, in New York, the third team, the Brooklyn Dodgers, everyone's favorite, except not really. They were warmly regarded by their fans as dem bums. The fans of the Dodgers and the residents of Chavez Ravine have like a common affection for what they love, which is like a fondness for shortcomings. They were not very good at the time, although they were getting better.
You're talking about my dad here, so back off.
I'll spend the second part discussing more about the team's time in Brooklyn, but the team's owner was a Mr. Walter O'Malley. O'Malley, along with part owner of the Dodgers, Branch Rickey, were responsible for crossing the color line and getting Jackie Robinson to play in the major league for the first integrated team.
Local boy.
Local boy.
Sort of.
Okay, I'll take it. But we need more. So in New York, the Dodgers played at Ebbets Field, which was built in 1913, but by the 50s, the stadium was falling apart. And O'Malley wanted to change that by building a more modern stadium in Brooklyn where his team could play. His opposition on this matter was
it's called Yankee Stadium.
We'll let the Dodgers play there as long as they keep telling us that we're the best.
It's in the Bronx, by the way. Come on. Let's have a little bit of world awareness here.
I've been on the phone trying to get hold of the Bronx Meekly, but they're really mean to me. So, I'm waiting to speak to somebody. In Harlem. I don't know how New York works. His opposition on trying to get his own stadium was the city planner, Robert Moses. I don't know if you know this, but Ebbets Field is owned by the city of New York. It's a public use space, so O'Malley had to go to the city if he wanted things done for the stadium. Now, O'Malley and Moses were equally hard-headed, and it drove O'Malley's thought.
Yeah, I've read the Bible. I know. Let my people go, Malley.
Go Malley should have been the name of the team.
The Brooklyn Go Malleys.
The Brooklyn Go Malleys. O'Malley had this thought that was starting to grow that a ball club should own its own stadium and the ground underneath it. Now, here in Los Angeles, before the Dodgers, we didn't have a major league team. We had a lot of smaller teams, and baseball had become started.
Do you know? Let me start again.
Could you tell me an hour and 20 minutes about
40 minutes.
Now that cross-country travel is becoming easier with airplanes, it had an opportunity for us to get an established team instead of having to grow another Angels team, taking one of these losers from Wrigley Field. So in 1957, County Supervisor Kenneth Hahn began to scout for potential teams that might be willing to relocate to LA. He comes across Walter O'Malley, who was looking for a place to play ball. So
That's where it came from.
So they met, and O'Malley laid down his steep demand. He wanted the land and the stadium to be privately owned by the Dodgers, and they said, sure. We have a perfect spot for you. And the city of Los Angeles was happy, and O'Malley was happy, and everything was right in the world, and no one had any problems with this at all. Play ball, except
Walt Disney.
A lot of things were promised to the residents of Chavez Ravine, and none of it ever came to fruition. The residents of Chavez Ravine, when they found out that the Dodgers were going to take this land, they were outraged and they were devastated. This was going to be, they kept promising public use no matter what, and now it's like, oh, we're going to put a baseball team here. You guys cool with that?
You mind living in like the bleachers or
like high bleachers because you guys are poor
and you have to pay for tickets every night?
The land was even worse off than they thought. Like this whole deal was so much worse than they thought it was going to be. And as Frank Wilkinson explained it, we'd spent millions of dollars getting ready for it, and the Dodgers picked it up for just like a fraction of the price. It was a tragedy for the people, and from the city, it was the most hypocritical thing that could possibly happen. To make it a solid piece of awful, though, in January of 1958, the city voted to move forward with the plan on Dodger Stadium and honor O'Malley's contract, despite the fact that they were calling out the city council and O'Malley for using the land for a purpose that wasn't particularly for public use. They just wanted a baseball team. In particular, the baseball team that had that year won the World Series. They're like, yeah, we want them.
That one.
Yeah, that
the
one.
Shiny one.
The shiny one. Yeah. The one that like never won anything. We want them over here. Play ball. So the battle for Chavez Ravine began, and it became a real confrontation on May 8th, 1959, when the LA County Sheriff deputies, along with a TV news crew, came to Chavez Ravine and forcibly removed people.
Of course, they brought the news crew.
Of course. You guys getting this? The deputies, led by Captain Joe Brady, who I'm pretty sure plays football now.
Yeah.
Were armed with a writ of possession for many of the properties.
Part of the Brady bunch. The football squad.
Yeah, but they didn't have a square for him. Alice took it, and she wasn't even a Brady.
You're going to go with Alice over me?
Now, Joe, you just have a big head, friend. We don't have bunk space for you in the house. They never mentioned... Did they ever mention the Brady bunch, that they both got divorces?
In the theme song. I mean, I don't think they said the word divorce.
It's like implied. It's implied that they were marriages that didn't work out.
Yeah. Here's the story of a lovely lady who got a divorce.
Oh, turn this off.
Not in my Christian household, because I believe in the afterlife.
And that's where you're going to see the husband that you picked for the first time, the person you lost your virginity to.
But I don't believe in a life after divorce.
Because I'll kill you. So Captain Joe Brady leads the sheriff deputies, and they're armed with a writ of possession for all the properties. They were met with the opposition, which was about 20 families that were still there. The Arachigas were hurling stones at deputies as movers hustled away with their belongings. Mrs. Glenn Walters was screeching at the deputies and was finally being forcibly ejected from her home, handcuffed, and then taken into a squad car. Other deputies met with a couple older women, and there's a picture of Miss Allen Martin, who was 73, and her friend Ruth Rayford, who are wielding broomsticks at them.
I think I've seen that.
Yeah, it's lovely. In one very dramatic instance caught on camera, and there's photos of this too, they carried a woman, Aurora Vargas, as she kicked and screamed. They carried her out. Before they did this, she said they'd have to carry me out. And they did. Everyone made good on their promise. She was the last person.
Finally, they made good on their promise. That's a promise we can keep.
Grab her feet. She was the last person to be evicted from these houses. And all of this lasted for about 2 hours. And afterwards, just like when you go to a funeral, and if you stay long enough, you can watch these big machines pound dirt into the ground over your loved one.
My favorite part of a funeral.
Yeah, really get them in there. Right after evicting people.
Because he might come back.
We're starting to think there might be an afterlife.
So please, cover it.
Cement that sucker. So right after evicting everybody from their homes, the homes were bulldozed.
At least they took them out first.
Hey, sweet. That was very considerate of them. So later, just to stick to the city, and good for them, members of the Archegos family and the Augustine family returned and lived on the property to protest the eviction and the bulldozing, and they lived under a tent.
And they were the first players to be drafted by the Dodgers.
You got
the LA Dodgers.
You mean them bums? I don't play for them. So now the Chavez Ravine.
Is Serif still here?
Because I got a Serifs jersey. You don't even have to give me anything. Oh, we're the Sans Serifs. We're different. So now that Chavez Ravine was truly vacant, it was one of the highest peaks in LA. Stone Quarry Hills was to be reshaped, and much of Chavez Ravine was to be demolished. I took a Chicano Studies class, and we talked about this.
Here we go. Going on about his Chicano Studies class again.
Hey, listen. I was told in my class not to take that from you. That you're to blame for everything. Apparently,
I'm not apologizing.
I almost refuse to. Apparently, there is an entire school intact underneath the Dodger Stadium parking lot.
Huh.
Yeah, intact.
Again, get the shovel. School's in session.
Pause it. My God, everything.
So there were still apples on the desk for the teacher. It was delicious.
The bathroom issue works.
We have to be in detention on Saturday.
We were just too loud. Should have got there right when the bell rang, but
80 years ago.
So construction crews had the task of building a baseball stadium in this massive hills. To do this, they literally had to move mountains to create this space. And not only did they have to deal...
gods!
We got Odin. We got Zeus. Aquaman, for some reason, too. I don't know what the deal with that is.
You mean the
Judge of the Waters?
The Judge of the Waters can't help?
That's what we got elected to do. So not only did they have to deal with the ravine and the steep hills, the elevation on some ranges was like 100 feet above sea level. They also had to like deal with winding roads, gullies, gushes, and washes, which is really crazy to think about, like that area and how like natural, it like sounds like a meadow. Like it's like the natural surroundings. I'm like, blow it all up. Let's put a hot dog stand here.
Martinez Meadow.
That would have worked perfectly. Yeah. Any Martinez's around here? For around 31 months between 1959 to 1962, 342 construction workers moved 8 million cubic yards of earth to reshape the area to fit the stadium. They were filling gullies, they were flattening hills, and moving dirt all over the city. Apparently, I've heard from my informant, I don't know if this is true, but I like to think it is true. These hills, they were moved to areas along East LA and like in Culver City, and they were used to make parks. And if you go to East LA, there are a lot of parks on hills. I'm wondering if that's true. I don't know. They all say, I've heard that these are all the dirt from when they made Dodger Stadium. Sometimes I believe my informant, and then I open my mouth like, that's crazy. I like his stories. It's my dad, not my boyfriend.
Finally.
Oh, I get it now.
Answer all the questions.
They used one steep terrace that was already kind of shaped like a bowl, and they used it as the main grandstand structure.
Sometimes I wonder.
You know it's the same person, right? You know that we like Chinatown a lot.
So when did you start dating your dad?
A couple of years ago.
This is a new podcast. WTP. What the Paw? Starring Air Marin.
I want the janitor to come in, and you're like, hey, is there an afterlife? Hey, is it okay if you date your dad? They just close the door.
There's a no and a yes in there.
There was one steep terrace that was already kind of like shaped like a bowl, so they used it to make that the grandstand structure, and they located the stands on the slope, which they fit into like a U-shaped hill. The northern side of the rock and sandstone hill was brought down and reshaped to fit like an amphitheater shape, and benches were cut into the slopes to create and support a foundation for the stadium. It's kind of hard to describe, but if I show you pictures, you'll kind of get it. They start shaping like benches, and they start building it because like they start tearing up the dirt.
Tearing or tearing?
Like making tiers of them, like the Indian who saw the trash and he hit one tier.
They tiered the dirt.
He was Italian. So the
like that Italian who saw the United States being littered on and he cried?
No, the hot Italians or whatever the hell they were called. What's it? The baseball team name that you...
The Sons of Italy?
That's what it is. The hot Italians.
Hot Italians. Is it okay if I date my hot Italian dad?
My hot Italian dad is my favorite romantic comedy. The grandstand has these like epic tiers which are all cantilevered, and it was built on 78 precast benches. To build the stadium, they used 4,000 cubic yards of concrete and 13 million pounds of reinforced steel. To assemble all of these pieces, they imported a $150,000 crane from Germany, which could lift the pieces. While this crane was here, it was the largest crane in North America, and I'm sure someone bragged about it. See that crane over there? Largest one in the whole country. What do you think about that?
And Canada.
Some parts of Mexico too. The total cost of this was close to $25 million and has the capacity to hold 56,000 baseball fans. The stadium, I mean, I've been going there since I was a kid. It's really close. It's actually quite excellent if you remove the fact that it was built on all these people's homes. I don't think it gets enough credit for how modern it looks. It has like a very streamlined look to it with its cantilevered construction of the tiers and the layout and everything. It has like a really good look. The designer is a man named Emil Prager, who was a former Navy captain who served in both World Wars, 1 and 2. II and had developed the original.
Those two.
Couple of world wars.
Which 2 world wars did he serve in?
Fought in a couple of world wars.
Which ones?
1, 2.
Yeah, those were good.
This Prager fellow developed the original concrete floating breakwater, which I had to Google to know what it was, but it's those concrete rectangle slabs you see at dams that kind of just like break the flow of water.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, great job. A rectangle made of concrete. He also had a hand in designing the renovation of both the White House and Central Library in downtown.
Oh.
Look at that. Him and O'Malley go back about like 10 years before doing Dodger Stadium. They were trying to develop a new stadium since they were in New York. Their first collaboration was creating the Holman Stadium in Dodgertown in Vero Beach, Florida, which is where the Dodgers train.
I think Dodger Stadium, I read, is now like the second oldest
the
baseball
third
stadium.
oldest standing baseball.
Is it third or second? Because I think Angel Stadium is like the third oldest one.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think it's like Chicago, Dodger Stadium, and Angel whatever.
Yeah.
Angel Heaven.
You mean the Pearly Gates? That's what they play.
The Pearly Gates.
The trip to Dodger Stadium as well is very beautiful. There are palm trees lining much of it. St. Gabriel Mountains are in the background. Sunglasses on. You're wearing your shorts.
No, the palm trees have sunglasses on.
They're wearing suntan lotion. They were weird looking.
But just on the tip of the fronds.
Why do people do
a big
that?
white zinc tip.
Neon green shorts that look like they were made by the Highlighter Company. I think personally the parking lot actually has the best view of the city, in my opinion. Better than like Griffith Observatory. The view from the Dodger parking lot, it's incredible. That's what I think.
Stance. Write in your complaints about that opinion.
On April 10th, 1962, Dodger Stadium officially opened and 2.7 million people attended the first game.
What?
Next episode, the first game.
Oh, what a cliffhanger.
So I used to...
Oh, he's still going. It looks like he got off the cliff. All right. No reason to turn in next month.
A cliffhanger. Oh, it's a dropper.
We lost him. It's all right. There's an afterlife.
It's funny, like, thinking back on what I used to think about Chavez Ravine, because I used to think that, like, Walter O'Malley was the villain of all this, and I thought, like, his move to build on Chavez Ravine was deliberate. But really, though, he was just a guy in New York struggling for his own thing, and he had, like, no idea till he got here what was going on. And by that time, it was so far into, like, oh, well, they don't have it anymore? It's a confusing situation to come into. I'm sure, like, when he got here, it was sort of like, well, I don't care about them. But, like, he didn't have a hand in them, like, he didn't go with Joe Brady and, like, get out of here.
Yeah, the news crew is there for that.
Yeah, exactly. And plus, like, he moved all these players to the West. He can't be like, well, I know that you guys changed your lives to be here, but these poor people want to stay here.
Sorry, Mike Piazza, you have to go home.
He's been playing for a very long time. What's the name of the guy on SNL who was there for like 40 years who played Bill Clinton?
He's the Darrell Hammond.
Darrell Hammond of the Dodgers. If I had to sum up the villains in this story, Joe McCarthy, the Citizens Against Social Housing, and Norris Paulson, who all had their own agendas and pushed to get areas like this wiped off the map. Capitalism, all their things stalled the project long enough for people to get distracted with the intent of Chavez Ravine and its residents, and like once time had passed for long enough, they could be like, oh, we don't remember anything about this big housing unit, let's build a Shakey's. And I feel bad, like, thinking
That's
about...
what should have been there instead of Dodger Stadium.
If I had to sum up...
World's largest Shakey's.
A Shakey's that it's like 83 acres.
Plenty of room for Mojo potatoes.
I ordered my pizza half an hour ago. Yeah, it's still on its way. This is an 83-acre Shakey's. So I think if I had to sum it up, as far as the heroes go, people who refused to leave their homes, good for them, even though they were paid money and they were kind of squatting a little bit. I'll say that. Frank Wilkinson, I have a big heart for, another hometown hero. And I really feel bad because, like, there are a lot of quotes where he shows actual regret and he calls it, like, the tragedy of his life. He, like, takes full responsibility for what happened. I wanted to give you guys good homes. I'm sorry.
Do the right thing.
Try to do the right thing. All that being said, I love Dodger Stadium. Even though people who lived in Chavez Ravine saying it's like dancing on a grave.